In the grand theatre of global politics, the United States, with each presidential act, has danced on the precipice of foreign policy triumphs and colossal failures. From the turbulent aftermath of the Cold War to the complexities of the Middle East, this is a tale of unintended consequences, geopolitical miscalculations, and the paradoxes of intervention. The United States of America, towards the end of World War II, knew that they would be the primary global superpower with competition from the Soviet system. So, to ensure that they could maintain this power, they needed the ability to decide who had access to and control of oil production, their friends or their foes. One such country which had these oil fields in abundance was Saudi Arabia. At the end of World War II, FDR travelled to the Great Bitter Lake in the Suez Canal and met with a king, King Abdulaziz ibn Saud.
American destroyer comes alongside a cruiser in Great Bitter Lake on the Suez Canal in Egypt. It brings Ibn Saud, king of the 5 million people of Saudi Arabia, to a conference with President Roosevelt.
In return for money and technology, the United States of America wanted control of the oil fields and oil deposits of Saudi Arabia. The king accepted the deal on one condition: that the United States would leave the Saudi faith alone. The Saudi faith was Wahhabism. Wahhabism is a radical, violent, and extremely puritanical form of Islam, and its followers among the Bedouin tribes hated the modern world. The Wahhabists believed modern imperialism was corrupting the true nature of Islam and had a desire to return to a world based on the original teachings of Sunni Islamic texts. King Abdulaziz ibn Saud harnessed this power in the 1920s, but he inadvertently unleashed something which would exponentially expand and multiply uncontrollably. The Wahhabists wanted to create an Islamic caliphate across the Arab world, but to stop the Wahhabists, in 1929, King Abdulaziz ibn Saud machine-gunned them down in the deserts of Saudi Arabia. He ruthlessly killed those who had made him king, thinking this would remove the problem. It did not. Their belief in a violent, intolerant, and backwards-looking version of Islam remained at the heart of Saudi Arabian society. By making this deal with Saudi Arabia, America would control oil supplies and protect Saudi Arabia, but, inadvertently, this would also protect the Wahhabist ideology, which would metamorphosize and come to haunt the West. In 1946, American engineers arrived at a dusty airstrip in southern Afghanistan in the Helmand province. These engineers worked for the giant American engineering firm Morrison Knudsen. This was the same firm that had built the Hoover Dam and the San Francisco Bay Bridge. Afghanistan's king, Mohammad Zahir Shah, who was in his early 30s, wanted to bring his ancient civilization into the 20th century. He invited the Americans in for a huge engineering project along the Helmand River in the unforgiving deserts of southern Afghanistan. This effort ultimately spanned 3 decades. The king aimed to harness the power of the Helmand River and modernize his country, just like the West. Afghanistan at the time was a deeply conservative country, and King Shah was determined to modernize it by copying what FDR did in the 1930s by building huge infrastructure projects. An entire Little America was built for the US workers and their families. It looked as if an entire community had been uprooted from the American Southwest and transplanted into southern Afghanistan. The families lived in white stucco homes, the men wore coats and ties, and the women dressed as they did back home. There was a clubhouse where the adults played cards and drinks were served. The kids played tennis, attended a co-ed school, and escaped the heat by frolicking along the banks of the Helmand River. This largely forgotten effort in southern Afghanistan is a cautionary tale of what happens when America tries to transform a land of impoverished, small-scale farmers and a deeply conservative culture where fundamentalist Muslim clerics resist social change. From the beginning, the project encountered problems. No proper water and soil surveys were conducted. The soil proved salty and drained poorly. Afghan farmers lacked the resources to replicate and expand on what the Americans were doing. By the 1960s, the United States government had taken over and the Peace Corps volunteers had moved into the area. As the dams were built, they had an unexpected consequence. They raised the level of the water table and brought salt to the surface. In this, a new flower thrived: poppies. Morrison and Cookson began to turn away from the country as more issues presented themselves, but the United States government doubled down as the Cold War heated up because the dams became a part of the struggle with the Soviet Union. All sides of the Cold War began to compete in offering to Afghanistan bigger and better projects. Afghan politicians exploited this ruthlessly, playing the US against Russia and China. Mohammed Daoud, the Prime Minister, used this to enhance his power, as Afghanistan is, and was then, a fragmented country split along ethnic and tribal lines.